Okay, I wanted to start off with a story, so I'm going to read off my cards, bear with me. At a young age, this man was sent to England for boarding school, away from his family and culture, between the Indian subcontinent during the 60s. Being away from his roots, this man indulged himself in academia, preferring literature and history to other subjects. As he continued into higher education, he dedicated his interest to fiction and literature. The man had been raised in a Muslim household, but never had cultured enough to practice the religion itself. Though he took interest in learning about the faith as a culture, as a belief, and as a story, he didn't know too much about it. With the lacking of an appropriate class that would allow him to learn about Islam, he took it upon himself and a professor to advise him to complete an independent study that followed the tale and combined fiction and Islam. Years later, this man published his novel with high hopes and expectations of the work he had committed. Yet that was not the reaction he received. With the publication of Satanic Verses, Salman Rushdie went from becoming an acclaimed author of Midnight's Children to an overnight criminal. So I share this story because as a Muslim filmmaker and journalist, I believe that what followed the global reaction to Rushdie's novel precedents a conversation on constructive reactions in Islam. Now, how many of you have actually heard of Salman Rushdie? Could I get a raise of hands? And how many of you have actually had the time to read Satanic Verses? So often we find that when we have an emotional attachment to a faith, to an idea, to a concept, to anything, and when it's attacked, we respond with rage, we respond with anger, we respond rashly. For example, post 9/11, the Muslim community was attacked. We, as a community, are still being stereotyped and generalized as a group that isn't necessarily what it comes out to be. As we can see from the many presenters here today, we have the generalizations and stereotypes about the Muslim community is not at all the truth. Stereotypes and generalizations are a dangerous tool that create sweeping misrepresentations. And when an individual, group, or person is attacked, the immediate response is rage. While Islam teaches us to stand up for our rights and defend our faith, it also teaches us to respect and accept others for their beliefs and faith. And I believe that as a Muslim, for me, I believe that it is to advise and teach others about Islam rather than to be the one judging. Because at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that can actually do the judging. As a documentary filmmaker, this logic is one that I hold very strong to. Islam wasn't necessarily the reason that I was influenced to do the work that I'm doing here today. In fact, I was very much interested into the double standards that was imposed in Islamic democracies in the Middle East. So for instance, today you look at Egypt, it's the cult of our civilization to an extent. But today, a comedian is jailed for, say, making jokes about the president. And that's the country that we look to as an Islamic democracy. And I find that to be a total double standard. Islam, that's not about religion. That's totally politics. In journalism, it's very important to leave our judgments and thoughts aside. Raw journalism engages tolerance and the ability to listen to others. Last year, I started a project with a friend of mine called Baltimore We Love You. The project explores poverty in the city in ways that engage different parts of the population. So we focus particularly on homelessness, human trafficking, and worker labor rights. One of the people that we got to interview had been homeless for a really long time before he had gotten to the point of actual advocacy and action for homelessness. His name was Mark. And when I spoke with him, some of the stories that he told me were it was soul-crushing. The one thing that struck out to me and that I can't seem to shake off my head was, he went day by day trying to get a little bit of money so he could get through the end of the day and get at least a meal. But money wasn't the most important thing to him. By just getting a smile from a stranger, his day would be turned around. And a smile is something that we own and that we don't have to give too much to appreciate and acknowledge someone. Yet he found that he got more money rather than a simple acknowledgement of kindness. And in our culture and in our society today, when we move so fast, we don't necessarily acknowledge that these little things mean so much to someone and could turn everything around for people in our community. One kid, we also came across two kids, and I actually have photos of them. The boy on the left, on the right, I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. He said he wanted to be a cop. The girl said she wanted to be a doctor. Now, in our culture, we encourage that. But for these kids, the environment that they're surrounded around doesn't cultivate that type of respect and support. So these kids, while they want to pursue dreams of becoming doctors, becoming cops, becoming engineers, they are limited to the resources that they get. And I find it hard to believe that while we put ourselves out there for different generations and our own kids, why is it that these kids go unnoticed? And as a filmmaker, as a journalist, I think that my role in the community isn't necessarily to just share these stories, but to build bridges between underrepresented populations. I wanted to close with a quote with one of my favorite authors, Arundhati Roy. Perhaps it's true that things can change in a day, that a few dozen hours can affect the outcome of whole lifetimes, and that when they do, those few hours, like the salvaged remains of burned house, the charred clock, the synced photograph, the scorched furniture, must be resurrected from the ruins and examined. Preserved, accounted for, little events, ordinary things, smashed and reconstituted. Imbued with new meaning, suddenly they become bleached bones of a story. Thank you.